Welcome on into the Wolverine TV recruiting show. I'm Clayton Sayfie with EJ Holland. We are from thewolverine.com. You can check our content out over there using the promo code BLUE60. That'll get you 2 months of our premium content for free, gets you access to our message board where you can communicate and discuss with thousands of Michigan fans that are also subscribers. But EJ, let's break down some of the top recruiting storylines of this week, and we'll kind of go back last week a little bit to some of the news that came out. Matt Dudek obviously moving on. He is fully going to work for Mississippi State, and Michigan looks like they're going to bring in Courtney Morgan. The program has not announced that yet, but he's a former Michigan offensive lineman, has worked out west with San Jose State, UCLA, has ties out there, has ties really all around the country as well. Played with Ron Bellamy under Lloyd Carr here in the early 2000s in Ann Arbor. So obviously knows Michigan, knows the recruiting trail and things like that. So let's just talk about Dudek first before we get to Courtney Morgan, though. Your thoughts overall on just him kind of moving on and the shakeup continuing for Michigan when it comes to not only the coaching staff now, but the support staff.
Yeah, I mean, look, with Dudek, he did some things well. He did some things not so well. I don't think everything should be blamed on Dudek. I think a lot of what has been blamed on Dudek, he's been used as a little bit of a scapegoat, but that's not making excuses for him. Look, the things that Dudek did well were, one, he was very organized, and you could see that especially last cycle and how he helped Jim Harbaugh schedule phone calls and Zoom meetings, and he was a big reason that Harbaugh was able to have 3 to 4 Zoom calls every day and still manage kind of the football side of things. When we were reporting during the pandemic, people kept asking the question, is Harbaugh more involved in recruiting? He's suddenly showing a more personal interest in recruiting. A lot of that had to do with Dudek kind of mapping out his days. He did a really good job of, making sure guys were getting on campus for self-guided tours, telling them what they could do, what they couldn't do, giving them key places to go within the rules. He kept the parents informed throughout the entire process of what they needed to turn in from an academic standpoint, clearinghouse stuff, SAT scores, you name it. Dudek was on top of all the paperwork for all the parents. He had, kind of basically a weekly email, just having a checklist for everybody to make sure that, everybody had their stuff in on time and that everybody had the right stuff in. And so, parents really praised Dudek for how well he handled that side of things, for how much he kept them informed, for how much he was involved in the academic side, and how he was able to help them get Zoom calls scheduled with the academic support staff as well. So professors, from deans of the schools. And so from that side, Dudek did great. I mean, I thought he was a great recruiting coordinator, not necessarily director of recruiting. So some schools have recruiting coordinators, which is more of an administrative role, where I feel like Dudek would have really excelled at and was excelling at. The point, where he wasn't excelling at, which is a big part of being the director of recruiting, is building those relationships with people around the recruits, building relationships with the recruits themselves, making sure the recruits are being kept in contact with, especially when the staff gets really bogged down with football related activities such as spring ball or just the actual season during the fall. And so Dudek didn't really do a great job there. A lot of times that's a common theme with Michigan recruiting, is kids, kind of lose contact with the staff. And that's not all the staff's fault. That's why you have a recruiting department, to make sure that somebody, whether it's an analyst or the director of recruiting or a recruiting operations guy, is keeping in contact with these kids, whether they're, first, second, tertiary options. It shouldn't really matter. You should always keep contact with kids, because you don't know what can happen in recruiting. There was a non-existent relationship with 7-on-7 coaches and trainers. High school head coaches as well didn't really have that kind of direct link with Michigan either. So I think in that area, Dudek failed. In the other area, he passed with flying colors. So look, I think Dudek could have definitely stayed on as more of an administrative role, more of that recruiting coordinator. But it's clear Michigan has been making some changes, has been making some specifically recruiting centric changes, and they felt like it was best to move on. So look, while there was room for Dudek to improve in that area, or to just simply not be involved in that area and be more of an administrative guy, I have no real issue with Michigan moving in a different direction, especially with how many changes have been made this offseason. At the same time, I don't think it was all Dudek's fault. I think the answer is kind of somewhere in the middle. But overall, Michigan decided to make the change, and now it looks like the Wolverines are going to bring in more of a guy that's not an administrative guy, more of a guy that fills the need of building relationships.
Real quick before I ask you more about Courtney Morgan, but based on kind of what you laid out there, and I agree with you in terms of Dudek. It's kind of how you look at what he was at Michigan. He did some things really well. He needed help in other ways, I guess is a nice way to put it. You said he failed in other ways, and I think that's accurate as well. Would a tandem of Matt Dudek and Courtney Morgan have been? And this may have been something that was on the table, or Jim Harbaugh even may have wanted. Obviously, the opportunity arose for Matt Dudek to move on to Mississippi State. But do you think that tandem would have actually been like the most ideal thing for Michigan?
Yeah, I definitely think a tandem would have helped, especially since Courtney Morgan's expertise appears to be more in the relationship department. You still need more of an administrative guy, but I think Michigan's just expanding its recruiting department overall and making changes. You look at some of the offers going out right now, they're not coming from their coaching staff per se. Some of them are coming from analysts. Guys like Ryan Osborne is the lead guy with a lot of the edge rushers on the board. Guys like Sean Larkins, he's leading the way with some prospects in the South. He's very, very involved with Walter Nolan, more involved than defensive line coach Sean Nua. So I think they are giving the analysts more recruiting responsibilities. Obviously, they're bringing in more of a relationship builder with Courtney Morgan, and it wouldn't be surprising to see them add some more staffers. I've always said that Dudek needed help. He could, it was basically Dudek and a couple of gophers in the recruiting office, and that shouldn't be the way it functions at the University of Michigan. In my previous beat, Texas, obviously Tom Herman was the head coach there, and he basically adopted the same model as his mentor Urban Meyer at Ohio State, and that's having a structure where you have got a recruiting director, an assistant recruiting director, recruiting operations people. You have your gophers, you have your analysts, and so you have this massive recruiting structure at places like Ohio State, places at Texas, even places that aren't on par with Michigan that I'm familiar with, like Baylor has a bigger recruiting department. So I think Michigan is realizing that it's the University of Michigan. You need multiple guys to help with your recruiting. And I know recruiting's, not necessarily at the forefront of a lot of fans' minds because Michigan obviously has to win on the field. But at the same time, you shouldn't neglect making improvements where you can make improvements. Those small improvements on the recruiting side of things will eventually help your program.
Yeah, and when Jim Harbaugh signed his extension back in January now, he put in his statement that he's going to look at all areas of the program, try to improve it. I think we've seen a lot of that, and then within that, you've seen a ton of emphasis being placed on recruiting. So it doesn't surprise me that, changes are being made. And you mentioned, some of the analysts getting more involved now. But specifically now with Courtney Morgan, I know you've, spoken to sources and, people that you have, known over the years covering recruiting, especially out west, just about Courtney Morgan. What are you hearing about him? What are you thinking that he's going to bring to the table? Because I think it's a great hire in the mold of, this guy knows Michigan. He knows relationships and has relationships all over the country. And he knows how to do this specific job. So I think it's kind of a win-win-win in that regard. What are you hearing on him, and what are your overall thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm very familiar with a lot of sources out west just from my time on the Texas beat. Tom Herman was originally from California, so Texas did a lot of recruiting out there and still, keep up with my sources out there. Guys like Christian Dixon, who Michigan landed last cycle. I knew a lot of people around his recruitment just from my previous beat. But anyway, in talking to guys like that and talking to key trainers and figureheads and 7-on-7 coaches out there, they really, really love Courtney Morgan. I texted a couple of my sources and said, hey, it looks like Michigan's going to hire Courtney Morgan. What do you think about him? And I got text back immediately. This is a great hire. We're definitely going to take our kids out there to visit. And so I think people out west really love him. Like I said, he's a relationship builder. He's originally from Los Angeles, so he'll help heighten Michigan's profile out west. Michigan does a pretty nice job recruiting out of California every year. But I think even now there's more kids for the taking, and I don't think Chatnua is necessarily building the relationships as much as maybe it was thought that he was going to be doing there. But I do think Courtney Morgan can do that. He can go out there. He can build the relationships. He can spread his wings nationally as well. And he's a former Michigan player too, so he can sell them on leaving, going further away from home and building his own legacy at a place like Michigan and then coming back as the director of recruiting. So overall, I think it's a really good hire. I'm interested to see how else Michigan, builds this recruiting department up. But if you're looking for, a relationship builder, you got the complete opposite of Matty Dudek in Courtney Morgan. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Definitely will be, and we will obviously follow it, and we'll see if they ever even make that hire official. At the same time, Michigan, sometimes it's like they don't even need a press release and guys are off and running. So that will definitely be interesting to see how it plays out on a number of levels. Let's get to your personal travels, EJ. Over the weekend, you were able to go to Memphis and see Walter Nolan, who is pictured there for our YouTube viewers, the 5-star defensive tackle out of Tennessee. Just one of the nation's elite players. And we joked before we went live here on this show that, we talk about him just about every week, but things just continue to progress with him and his recruitment. You were obviously able to, meet him in person, talk to some of his family members. Cody Jones was down there as well, 4-star Michigan defensive back commit. Your travels incognito down there to Memphis over the weekend, what'd you gather?
Yeah, so I made kind of a low-key trip out to Memphis. I kind of set some things up behind the scenes, got to meet with Walter Nolan and his family, Cody Jones, Michigan's 4-star defensive back commit and fellow Memphis native. I got to meet with him and his family as well. So it was a great time out there. As you said, things have continued to progress with Walter Nolan. He has locked in 3 official visits for the summer. First stop will be Florida, followed by Michigan, followed by Alabama. I think right now this is shaping up weirdly to be a Michigan-Alabama battle. Najee Harris flashbacks for some Michigan fans, I suppose.
Sean Hand.
But, maybe this one actually works out. Look, with Walter, he obviously loves Bama for obvious reasons. I mean, he was just at their spring game on Saturday, and obviously Alabama's getting the last summer official visit, like I just mentioned. Alabama is Alabama. They produce high-level defensive linemen. They win national championships. They put guys in the NFL. Walter knows what he can get at Alabama. Every recruit that has a legitimate offer from Alabama knows the advantage of going to Alabama, playing in the SEC, playing in front of a rabid fan base, etc. There's a lot of advantages to going to a football factory like Alabama. At the same time, you might go to Alabama and just be another part of the team that wins national championships. I think for Walter Nolan, while I'm not saying he's not a team player, he knows that at Michigan, he has a chance to come in and maybe start as a true freshman and be a Rashawn Gary type of guy for the Wolverines. He knows that he can, especially with the name, likeness, and image, he knows that he can come in and build his own personal brand. As you see, Michigan's already sending him graphics like the one you're seeing on the screen. So he knows he can build a brand. He knows, even though it's not the SEC, Michigan has a huge fan base. They fill up the big house. It's the big house for a reason. You're still playing on a grand stage on national television. And he has family in the state of Michigan, in the Detroit metro. His mother's originally from there. His grandparents still live there. So he would have the family. He would have the opportunity to play early. Michigan has no problem, despite struggles on the field, to put guys in the NFL. And maybe most importantly, not only can he build his personal brand, but he can be part of the change that gets the winningest program in college football back where it used to be, and really cementing a legacy as opposed to just winning another title at Bama that any high level recruit can go and do. You can really be a part of something special alongside fellow five-star Will Johnson, who I think his commitment kind of even legitimizes Michigan as even more of an appealing option. So overall, there's a lot of advantages for Walter and Michigan too. Like I named it, it's different than Alabama. You have a chance to make your own legacy, to be the big man on campus. Alabama's maybe more of a guarantee for winning national championships and, playing closer to home and being in the SEC and all of that good stuff. But I mean, Walter's interest in Michigan is very, very legitimate. His family is very high on Michigan, especially his mother, who, like I mentioned, is from the Detroit Metro. And on that side of the family, they actually have a couple of Michigan alums as well. So, I think things are lining up for Michigan to continue being a true contender. And like I said, I also got a chance to see Cody Jones, and he's recruiting the hell out of him. They played Little League football together. And so there's a tie there. You already have another Memphis guy coming up. Ron Bellamy is doing a terrific job. He's from the South. Walter Nolan's from the South. And Bellamy has done a really nice job of telling him, look, I went from New Orleans all the way up to Ann Arbor. I mean, you can go up to Michigan and be successful and build your own legacy. So all of that has Nolan really, really interested in Michigan.
It's kind of funny, we're not sitting here and downplaying national championships, which is kind of funny. It sounds pretty appealing to me to go win the national championship, but you mentioned just so many factors that are working in Michigan's favor, and Ron Bellamy's an interesting one. Obviously, he kind of has, if Nolan does go to Michigan, they have a similar story, and Ron Bellamy came to Michigan, loved it, and has never left. He was a Detroit Lion, then, got into coaching high school ball in the Detroit area, then stays, comes back to Ann Arbor now as the safeties coach. Obviously, that's a huge appeal to have a guy who's been in your shoes, and done what, you possibly might do. Name, image, and likeness is an interesting one too, because, a kid like Walter Nolan, you would think on the surface Michigan doesn't have a chance, but you mentioned the pitch to them, and I was, reading your article the other day with the quotes from him. Everyone can, check that out at thewolverine.com, but, just kind of about how he's looking for a program that's willing to market him as well as, themselves. And I think that a school like Michigan, with the way that they operate, is probably going to have to dip into that a little bit more, especially when talking to kids like Walter Nolan. So definitely fascinating there. And I'm sure we'll be talking about Walter as the weeks go on here and as his recruitment unfolds, but obviously huge that he is coming back up to campus as well in June. The last thing that we have is, Michigan continuing in this class of 2022. They got their 7th commit this week with Tyler Morris jumping on board, the Rivals 100 wide receiver, number 78 player in the country, number 8 wideout. And Dylan Tatum is kind of a name that comes up next, a guy that may pull the trigger next, and a guy that I think Michigan is feeling really, really good about. Your thoughts on who could be next and Dylan Tatum overall, because he's kind of nearing a decision here this spring?
Yeah, I mean, right now, the only really imminent guy on the horizon that's making a decision is Dylan Tatum. So we'll kind of focus in on him. I checked in with Dylan last night. You can go over to thewolverine.com, use promo code BLUE60, get 60 days for free, and check out my report on Dylan. But he's still looking to make a decision by the end of the month. He's actually checking out Michigan State this weekend, which, gives us a little, pause, a little reason for concern. But at the same time, he's been to Michigan so much. He has so many connections to the program, whether it's good friend Donovan Edwards or former head coach Ron Bellamy, who is now his primary recruiter at Michigan. I just think it makes a lot of sense. Will Johnson is a really good friend and part of the same 7-on-7 program, Max X for Sound Mind, Sound Body. So again, it just makes a lot of sense for Dylan to end up at Michigan. Right now, it is more of a Michigan State battle. I think Baylor, who was in his top 3, is kind of just fiddled away. And so I do expect Dylan to make a decision soon. If, you had to make a prediction on who would be next, it would be Dylan. But Michigan State trying to do whatever they can to get Dylan and stop the constant poundings that that Michigan has been giving them on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, and thinking about, I understand he's considering Michigan State, and it's an in-state program, and it's completely fine. He's going to their spring game, but it's like if he were to choose Michigan State, despite all those connections he talked about at Michigan, it would be a real stunner to me personally, and I think that Michigan would obviously continue to recruit him, and I think that thing would probably go the way of Rayshon Benny. Like at some point, he would end up flipping to Michigan. And this is just me, guessing on what I think would happen, but. So obviously Michigan has reason to feel really good for the reasons you mentioned with Donovan Edwards, Makari Page, Cornell Wheeler, Ron Bellamy, the fact that, he probably liked Michigan the most throughout the recruitment process before Bellamy even got there. So, tons to like about Michigan's spot with Dylan Tatum. And would it totally shock you if he comes back from Michigan State, and next week says, hey, I've seen everything I need to see now, and I do want to make a decision. And obviously I think we'd feel good about Michigan. You would kind of think off the heels of a Michigan State visit that it'd be State, but I think that would be quite a stunner.
Yeah, it would be. And I mean, I think Dylan has to make his decision soon. Obviously, if he says the end of April, that's coming up. It's April 20th. So doesn't have a lot of time to make a decision. So yeah, I do think it would be a really big shock to everybody in the recruiting world if Dylan sided with the Spartans. But overall, I still feel like even though he's visiting there, he's giving Michigan State one last shot and is leaning Michigan at this point.
I was out talking to Tayshaun Trent, Michigan wide receiver commit, about a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks, and I said, who you're recruiting the hardest? He said Dylan Tatum, and I said, do you think you're close? He said, yeah, I think I'm close. And it was kind of funny. Tyrell Henry, I think is his name, Michigan State commit, was right there too, saying like, nah, like we're gonna get him. And Tayshaun Trent just kind of laughed like, no, we are. So I thought that was kind of funny. So obviously they're working on him from all angles there, and feel good about their spot with him. But that is our show for this week. Stay tuned for developing news on all of this at thewolverine.com. As we've mentioned a couple times, the promo code BLUE60 gets you 2 months of our premium content for absolutely free. And we'll see everyone next time.